500 pages of meticulous evidence.
Dr. Judy Wood earned a PhD from Virginia Tech and is a forensic scientist and an engineer with over 35 years of experience in this very area. In the time since 9/11/01, she has applied her expertise to a forensic study of over 40,000 images, hundreds of video clips, and a large volume of witness testimony pertaining to the destruction of the World Trade Center complex. You do not push a belief. You basically are telling the reader to come to their own conclusion based on the evidence that you present.
I don't ask anyone to believe me. I don't want them to. I want people to know it for themselves. I want people to understand what this is. See this guy, Nikola Tesla. He can generate all of these various pieces of evidence, all these different phenomena. So can John Hutchison. When he tried to replicate the work of Nikola Tesla, he discovered all of these characteristics. And all of those characteristics were found at the World Trade Center site.
We're trying to show the people these things such that they know for themselves that it's true and they don't need anybody else to tell them. You know, they can actually see from the available evidence what the truth is.
There are 7 buildings with the WTC prefix that were destroyed that day. Now, all of the data is consistent, and what I believe in looking at evidence is you never force the evidence to give you an answer. You let the answer come to you. It's important to first determine what happened, then how it happened.
If you go onto the BBC News website, you'll find things like this about the so-called pancake collapse theory, which it is, and it's not correct. Errors in graphics like this. It says that fire reaches 800 C, hot enough to melt steel. That's incorrect. Steel melts at 1500. Whether you go with the official story of the pancake collapse and so on, or whether you go with this later story of bombs in the buildings, the building in either of those two sets of circumstances would have hit the ground.
Basically, it would have clattered to the floor over a period of well over a minute.
Yeah, something like that.
So you would have had a seismic trace up and down for over a minute, and it was barely it was practically non-existent.
Yeah, well, it was much smaller. I mean, Dr. Wood compares it with the Seattle King Dome.
The Seattle King Dome was a controlled demolition. Notice it has an S wave and a B wave arrival. I call this the nozzle, kind of leading up to the big signal.
And she compares that with the World Trade Center, which were much taller buildings and so on. So she has that direct comparison, looking at the scientific data for those two things, and they clearly do not match up.
If the buildings had slammed to the ground, the seismic signal would have shown it. This is what was there beforehand, and it just basically all went away.
Where the hell did these buildings go?
Relative to the size of the building, there wasn't any debris left.
You know what day the picture was taken because Building 7 is still standing, so it was before 5 p.m. on 9/11. Tower 2 is basically missing. Tower 1 is missing over there.
I mean, you didn't find a shard of glass, anything that looked like would be used by a person, you just didn't see.
The buildings turned to dust before they even reached the ground. You can actually see this happening. You can watch any of the videos from the news channels. They all show the same thing.
We thought we knew what we saw.
A plane hitting the building should not turn the buildings into dust.
We've got to start looking at this whole situation a lot differently than we have up until now.
We're talking here about 43,600 windows, 600,000 square feet of glass, 200,000 tons of structural steel, 5 million square feet of gypsum, 6 acres of marble, and 425,000 cubic yards of concrete, turned in good part into a cloud.
The 110-story tower disintegrated in just 10 seconds.
That's not a collapse. And it's not an explosion. It's a building frothing up into powder. Collapses don't do that. The seismic recordings would have reflected 2 500,000-ton buildings slamming to the ground, but they did not. Didn't happen. There's a cluster of core columns that remains here. Watch what happens to them. They just faint. Here's Building 7, which is a 47-story building. It's like 650 feet tall, approximately. This has got to be over that.
It physically disintegrates in front of your eyes. Not concrete, but steel.
You can see all of this just frothing up into dust. And it's also blowing downward. That's about 700 feet tall. If that thing tipped over, it would take out a few blocks worth of buildings. How's it going to go straight down? You got a 700-foot hole in the ground, dropping into? This video is of Building 7. Notice it's one face and one face only that has this lather pouring out of it. If that's smoke, why is it one face only from ground to roof? That does not look like a fire pouring out a window.
Is basically not touched at all. A few little fires in it. I mean, it was weird. It was bizarre.
It blew out of one face of the building only, from bottom to top. These windows are broken. If it was smoke from a fire and it really needed to get out, why isn't it coming out these windows? If there's a traffic jam, why does it take the path of least resistance? Notice it's spiraling around. And the wind that day was only like 7-8 miles per hour. It's not pushing out, it's being sucked out, it looks like. And that poured out of the building all afternoon. For 7 hours. That's a lot of material.
So basically it was disintegrating from the inside.
by 5:20 p.m., there wasn't enough mass left to slam to the ground.
The walls were like an empty shell.
I wonder how many people out there listening to us right now are just dumbfounded, looking at each other.
Where's the signal for Building 7? This is an earthquake that was in Manhattan in January of that year, on the same bedrock. It was in Midtown Manhattan. So we can test how that bedrock carries a signal. This has a whole lot more high-frequency waves, a whole lot more going on. I call this the nozzle, kind of leading up to the big signal. This is when the P wave arrives, the primary wave and then the secondary wave. And you can tell how far away an earthquake is by the delay of those, if it travels through the ground. If it doesn't travel through the ground, you don't get S wave and P waves. You only get surface waves. No S wave and P wave arrival. This part of the building doesn't make a thud when it hits.
When you look at where the towers used to stand, there is surprisingly so little rubble.
The most amazing part of it is those two little pimples where there's an arrow that points that people survived here.
And that's like right under the tower.
Mickey Cross feared they would all be dead before anyone found them.
I had no idea what was over us. I'm thinking 110 stories. How much rubble that is, how, if they start pulling it apart, how long would it take for them to get to us?
They assumed they were buried under such debris that they'd be dead by the time anyone found them.
But then the strangest thing happened. This beam of sunlight came right in on us.
After the dust settled, they looked up and saw blue sky.
I'm like amazed now. It's a 110-story building above us, and I'm looking up at the sun.
The descriptions they gave were not of a building falling on top of them, or not of bombs exploding around them. It wasn't high heat. They didn't get cooked. They didn't get squashed. I looked up and said, guys, there used to be 106 floors above us, and now I'm seeing sunshine. There's nothing above us. That big building doesn't exist. These are the biggest office buildings in the world, and I didn't see one desk, one chair, one phone, nothing. I've got a short little clip to play. It's what some of the firefighters said who came out of the building.
It was coming down from the interior on us. A lot of people don't know that. It was coming down. It was coming from the interior. It trapped us on the third floor. The inside structure was just disintegrated. We're like, how is this happening when the plane was up 50 more stories and the stairwell was collapsing on us? Something wasn't right, man.
The interior of the building was disintegrating.
Absolutely.
So I like that kind of observation. It's data that they're looking at and thinking instead of just regurgitating. You take that into consideration. I mean, they were talking about bombs going off.
Yeah, bombs and fire don't really do that kind of thing to the interior of a building, do they?
A lot of folks say that there are sounds of explosions. Well, bombs do go boom, but not everything that goes boom is a bomb. Think of an egg in your microwave oven. Folks like to think that that's a squib from some kind of explosion. Well, there should be a whole lot more of them, and why doesn't it squirt out very far? One thing that comes to mind is water tanks. You pump it up in approximately 10-story intervals, another holding tank, pump it up from there. So you're going to have these water tanks staggered all throughout the building at some regular interval. And what happens when this pressure vessel begins to weaken? It's starting to dustify. At some point, it's suddenly going to give way, and the contents are going to squirt out. I think that's what that could look like. I don't know what this is, But that makes a lot more sense to me than a bomb. Turn off cell phones and two-way radios, blasting zone ahead. Rock quarries, you don't want to have, an accidental detonation. So how are you going to wire up a big building and not have anyone using their cell phones in Manhattan? You have a steel beam flying through the air, and it's dissolving as it flies through the air. It's turning into dust, and it's not hitting anything. The building was not smashed to bits. So that's why pulverizing doesn't describe it.
No explosions, no heat, no flames.
Vaporization implies high heat. If you would have seen the whole building glowing, people would have been blinded by the light. It's very dense dust. It initially blocked out all of the sunlight, 100% of the sunlight, so it was pitch black. You come to the realization that these pieces of material are becoming dust. They're frothing up into dust as they fall.
And if you watch some of these pieces, you can actually see them turning to dust before they hit the ground.
It turns to dust.
That's amazing. That is amazing. I mean, just like a Star Trek thing. It just, poof, it's gone.
What we saw and what happened on 9/11 was something that we as the public had never seen before.
Let's talk about the toasted cars, because this is one of the most fascinating things for me.
The most striking area is West Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
It goes past Building 7 and goes north for several blocks. And every car along there was toasted. What I mean by toasted is it's toast, it's history. Not necessarily burning being the cause, just you can't repair it, you have to buy a new one. You have to replace it. All the cars along that road were toasted.
This isn't just one isolated incident. Cars as far away as a quarter of a mile away were getting damaged.
You will see an image of the parking lot with the cars in a normal state. And then the next frame of the video, you will see that the cars are still in the parking lot and they've been completely toasted. All right, so they haven't moved. How is this possible? This picture alone proves that the official story is false, and it proves that there are armies of liars and trolls trying to cover up this evidence that I'm showing you now. And these people should be ashamed of themselves.
Where that car park is, there's a sea of unburned paper in between that wasn't ignited.
Here's an example of a dodgy car. Right, we've got a car here that's half damaged and half pristine. If you like put your hand over one half of it, it looks like a new car.
Yep, that's a pretty good picture. And we've got several pictures of that, different angles. And this, I'm pretty sure this is on FDR Drive, this car, which is about half a mile away.
Whatever happened to that car, it shouldn't have happened like that. So if it happened here or it happened underneath the World Trade Center, it wouldn't matter. It's
You make a very good point.
These are the air tanks that the firefighters wear so they can breathe fresh air when they're in a smoky environment. They have extra tanks on their fire trucks. Those extra tanks were said to have been exploding at ground level. That's weird. And there's a lot of testimonies of those. There's one in particular by Rene Davila that is interesting. His boss asked him, Was your vehicle destroyed? And he said, yeah, vehicle 219 was destroyed. Was it on fire? What? Was it on fire? Fire, we saw the sucker blow up. We heard a boom. His vehicle blew up.
It appears that there's something in the environment that has had an effect on, particularly on metal objects, basically.
Metal being more easily affected than others, but there's different types of metal that are affected more easily, like the door latches, the trunk lids, the door handles on the cars. Those were pretty easily destroyed quickly.
Now then, another graph that Dr. Judy generated from data from the Alaskan magnetometer readings. Got this peculiar thing.
It's haywire all day, and right till 5:20 when the building 7 comes down, and then it just goes back to normal. So whoever did 9/11 had to be able to move hurricanes around and affect the Earth's magnetic field at the same time. They're like in a cave with a satellite phone.
Right. This is an amplified trace of the Earth's magnetic field run by the University of Alaska. During the events of 9/11, these things go haywire. You can see that this deflection of the Earth's magnetic field started around about 8:15, carried on and reached a minimum point at 8:46, and then it kind of sort of recovered and reached a maximum at where that brown line is, around about 9:03, 9:04. It started to just go down again. So anyone know what happened at 8:46 on 9/11? It was when this alleged first plane struck. So, what does this mean, folks? Do you think that a plane crash can affect and make a hole in the towers, and it can affect the Earth's magnetic field as measured 3,500 miles away, which is where these instruments were? I suggest to you that, I put it to you that we're looking at something off the charts of your current experience and knowledge if you've not been studying some of this separately. We're talking about energy effects. All of the evidence points to energy effects, and none of it points to traditional explosives, nukes, bombs, and thermite, and any variation of that. The Hutchison effect, an explanation by Mark A. Solis, which was written in 1999. First of all, the Hutchison effect is a collection of phenomena which were discovered accidentally by John Hutchison during attempts to study the longitudinal waves of Tesla back in 1979. The Hutchison effect occurs as the result of radio wave interferences in a zone of spatial volume encompassed by high voltage sources. The effects produced include levitation of heavy objects, fusion of dissimilar materials such as metal and wood, anomalous heating of metals without burning adjacent material, spontaneous fracturing of metals, temporary and permanent changes in crystalline structure and physical properties of metals. Levitation is not the result of simple electrostatic or electromagnetic levitation. That's what John Hutchison discovered in the 70s. One of the strange effects that Dr. Judy Wood catalogued was these weird fires. This is John Hutchison's experiment of trying to reproduce the Philadelphia experiment.
What it shows is when he turns off his gizmo, then the boat lights up with weird fires. And the cars lit up right after the tower's demise, not during, right after, as though it was right after something got turned off. This igloo cooler and the plastic trash can are not melted. The paper is not burned either on the ground.
Look at this top image. This top image is before building number 7 was destroyed, and we have this strangely mangled bus here, which is very peculiar. But if you look at the bottom image, the bus is even more mangled, and it's moved.
So it's been impacted by the energy. So disintegration and movement, which is the Hutchison effect, isn't it?
We'll get onto that, but that's it.
Yeah.
So there you are. This is a side-by-side comparison, hours apart. You can see these effects are not the effects of explosives.
Yeah.
This is a degradation. It's not an explosive destruction. Bent beams. That's a copper bar, 3-inch diameter solid. It's not hollow after one of John's experiments. That's a beam from the World Trade Center. I'm going through this quite quickly. This is all in the book, and I've got booklets and all kinds of stuff. It's plain as day when you see it, when the comparison has been made.
Notice there's no creases in the corners. It curls up like that, like at room temperature. And this is a video that hopefully will run. There we go. It wiggles back and forth.
This is a police car, as you see, NYPD. Is it parked that way, do you think, on 9/11? Here's John Hutchinson's reproduction. He was challenged, a $100,000 bet to reproduce his levitation effect with this wrench by a chap called Ace Baker, I've written about in my book. John did the challenge. He reproduced the levitation. Of course, Ace Baker never showed up. We've got a number of levitation accounts of witnesses.
South Tower came down, I was across the street. At one second I was running, and the next second I was airborne. And I lost my glasses, I lost my cell phone, I lost my pager, but managed to hold on to both cameras.
But it threw you for a block?
I was back down at Ground Zero last week and walked the area where I have a pretty good recollection of where I was and where I wound up, and it was just under a city block.
He's a New York Daily News photographer. He was levitated and carried a block. This is from Michael Mako. I realized I couldn't get out from under the collapse. I dove under the ESU truck that was facing north on the west side of West Street. I dove under that and waited for the building to come down. When the building did come down, I actually thought I was trapped, and the truck was blown off me, pushed off me, I guess. It was not there. At that point, I was just really shocked and didn't know what was going on at that point. I didn't know. I was really, really shocked. So hang on a minute. It dives under this ambulance. The building comes down, then the ambulance is gone. We've got recently discovered a Stairwell B, the survivors in Stairwell B. One of them describing coming down the stairs, and he's got one of these, heavy hard hats on, and he hears the building coming down, and his hat starts lifting off, and he grabs it on. Excuse me, why would his hat lift off? What's going on?
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat into one single element.
And almost like a chunk of lava from Kilauea or Iceland, where they're very sharp but breakable shards on the end here.
Now let's think about hurricanes. What do? Well, Hurricane Andrew drove this 2x4 through a tree. Piece of plywood. And with tornadoes, I'm sure you've all heard about straw through trees. It's not because they're flying fast.
NIST, when they wrote the technical reports about how the World Trade Center was destroyed, which they received over $10 million, they used a number of contractors. And two of them were Science Applications International Corporation and Applied Research Associates, and also Boeing supplied data. They all do research in directed energy weapons. SAIC are manufacturers of directed energy weapon systems or components. SAIC were in charge of ground zero security the day after 9/11. Another speciality of that company is, guess what? Psychological operations, folks.
You've looked at a lot of these effects, and basically you sort of say that, well, look, the whole, if you consider the whole body of evidence, it can't be explained by any of the other
By any kinetic energy. Driving on the Manhattan Bridge, there were some EMTs, emergency medical technicians, who spoke of, you could feel the heat from the bridge. It was so hot you could feel the heat from the bridge. Well, the paper in between them and the towers, 3/4 of miles away, didn't burn. So it wasn't conventional heat, it was something their body sensed as heat. So we can't see it, but we can see things that are just like that.
Right.
Like a microwave oven, you don't
Yeah.
see that, but you see the effects. And we also know that it affects liquid differently than dry paper.
If you put, I don't know, something on a piece of paper in a microwave, the paper doesn't get hot, I don't think. Does it?
If it's dry,
If
right.
it's dry. If you put a knife and fork in there, you get all of these flashes, which
Affects metal differently.
yeah, so affects metal differently. So we can see that there's maybe a parallel to be drawn with microwaves.
But what that is a demonstration of
Mhm.
is that that's directed energy
Mhm.
in your microwave oven.
Yeah.
And what we saw in 9/11 had the same symptoms of some kind of directed energy,
Right.
not kinetic energy.
Real progress is being made in a laboratory in Canada. Here, the full significance of the physical laws of light and space have become clear to John Hutchison, and he is utilizing this knowledge to produce cause and effect experiments which lead to an understanding of the harmony of nature. Science, in harmony with the laws of nature for the good of mankind, will hold great values in many fields and would advance its course beyond our present comprehension. John Hutchison has been working in the areas of electromagnetic forces and the changes in the molecular structure of materials for many years. He has in this time achieved a breakthrough in anti-gravity knowledge, providing spectacular examples of heavy objects flying through the air without any visible signs of propulsion. He has also made amazing discoveries concerning the alteration of compositions of materials by subjecting them to a form of electromagnetic bombardment.
We're looking at something which you know shouldn't be happening.
In that description of the Hutchison effect, I read out about electrical phenomena. This is one of the secrets of 9/11 that no one will talk about, because once you start to discuss it, you open Pandora's box, and once you see it, there is no going back. No going back. Weather on 9/11. Hurricane Erin is closest to New York City at about 8 o'clock in the morning. I see quite a few familiar faces in this room, so there's a few people who know this, but I dare say there's probably a number of folk that have looked at the 9/11 stuff have never heard about that. The eye of the hurricane is shaped like a pentacle, a five-sided shape, which is very strange. Don't have an explanation for that. So here's the path. 1st of September starts off as classified as a hurricane. Then it moves and hits Bermuda on the 7th of September, does a bit of damage. 8 o'clock in the morning on 9/11, it's closest to New York City. September the 12th, makes a right-hand turn and goes off out towards Newfoundland. Well, that's obviously just a coincidence. Nobody should be talking about that one. It's only to do with weather control, after all. It's just a trivial thing.
Part of my story that I'd like to really emphasize is involvement of Wikipedia in the censorship of this evidence and what is going on. Not only are they not sharing the evidence, but they're actually actively preventing it from being shared on Wikipedia, despite the fact that it is a public forum and a public place for discussion. I signed up for an account on Wikipedia so that I could edit it, because it's available to be edited by the public. And I created a page devoted to Dr. Judy Wood. Talked about her academic credentials, talked about all of her peer-reviewed publications, major engineering journals, her efforts as an academic professor, as a scientist, as a researcher. They are just unbelievably powerful in and of themselves, aside from all of this 9/11 effort that she has also put forth. So I thought that she is well deserving of a Wikipedia page. And so I created a page, put a lot of her information on there, and in one small section of the page, I mentioned her efforts in the 9/11 truth community. She has assembled facts. I mentioned that she has taken these facts and actually sued the private corporations that were involved in the phony 9/11 investigations and the science fraud that occurred during those investigations. She actually sued them based on scientific merit, based on the Data Quality Act, trying to hold them accountable for the science fraud that they have put forth that continues to affect the world till this day. And I put some documents from her court case on there, and it was just amazing because within a few hours of creating that Wikipedia page, someone had already deleted it. Some moderator with higher powers had already deleted the page. I tried to recreate it, and that moderator would not allow that to be done, no matter what reasons I gave. My next step was to try and insert her name and website into the Wikipedia page called 9/11 Truth Movement. They even have a page called the 9/11 Truth Movement on Wikipedia. So I thought, well, if I can't have her own page, then of course I can stick it in there, stick a link to her websites and mention her court case there. It will bring more attention to the facts that she has discovered and assembled for us. Unfortunately, someone was even moderating that page very, very closely, because within a matter of minutes of inserting one or two sentences about her into one of the paragraphs and inserting a link to her website at the bottom of the page, someone had detected that and had deleted out those sentences I had added and deleted out the link to her website that I had added.
It seems like
very alarming.
It seems like her name might be flagged on Wikipedia.
Yeah, the actual proof came during the appeal. The public policy of Wikipedia, I believe, is that public appeal discussions are meant to stay open for several days. I believe it's like 5 to 7 days, so that enough public moderators can log in, look at the debate, weigh in, give their vote, and then a decision is made after several days. Within something just like 12 hours, my appeal discussion was closed and locked down so that no one else could comment on it or edit it. And so that was a violation of Wikipedia's own policy in the way that this was addressed. I started actually individually messaging the moderators and saying, look, you have violated this website's policy. You could try and censor this information that is completely appropriate for this page, and more important than anything that's currently on this page. That is when two very, very important things happened. One is that my account was banned. So they completely banned my account because I was pointing out that they had broken the rules of the website to try and censor the information that I had put on there about Dr. Judy Wood. And then number two, that's when I got a message from one of the moderators. His user account was named Hooperbloob. Ultimately, it's what he said that is the second and most important thing of what happened with the Wikipedia exchange. He literally said to me, he said, I would give up on this topic. I would give it a rest. It's a waste of your time, because even if you came up with good reasons that she should be mentioned on this page, they wouldn't let you anyway because she is on a block list. Her name is blocked. And so he admitted to me that there is a block list that Wikipedia has, and her name is on it. And so moderators are instructed to reflexively just block any mentioning of her or the material that comes with her name.
Wow, they have a special flagging specifically for Dr. Judy Wood. That's amazing. Wikipedia censors Dr. Judy Wood.
Yeah, and on the other side of things, there's full-fledged discussion about Richard Gage and Thermite and Alex Jones and Dmitry Kalazov, but no mentioning of Dr. Judy Wood. So it's okay to talk about everything else, thermite, bombs, explosives, nukes, jet fuel, whatever, but don't you dare talk about Dr. Judy Wood, otherwise they're going to freaking block that and they're going to ban you. It's just amazing, and it's all documented in screenshots and actual snapshots of what actually happened, so you can read the exchange for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it or anything.
President Eisenhower, going back to what he said in 1961, he said that a government contract has become a substitute for intellectual curiosity. And that, I don't think anybody could have said it better than that. Some people don't think Eisenhower was an honest person, and maybe he wasn't because he had to be a president, but at least in his leaving speech I think he gave a few clues as to what was going on behind the scenes, and I'm amazed that he had that figured out. Yeah, well, I think because he was party to a lot of stuff, and he was in the army too. He was a general in the US Army. So he'd been in the war, and he saw the way that worked, and he wasn't stupid. So, and he saw it, and he says this in his speech, he saw how the military-industrial complex had grown from this sort of fairly sort of basic thing into this huge monstrosity, which sucked in enormous funds and had enormous power, not only, of course, political power, but actual physical power in terms of weaponry.
How is it that you came to begin questioning the 9/11 events?
The first real incident that I remember that led me to question 9/11 was becoming very concerned with the wars and repeatedly hearing on television that the wars were happening because of 9/11. And this was around 2008 when I was getting towards the end of studying biology at the University of Iowa in undergraduate college. Our country was on this trajectory to cause all this harm and to drop all these bombs when there's so many people here at home that really need our help and so many things could be improved. And so it's really just my concern for peace and wanting to promote peace that led me to become very concerned. And that's what led me to actually, unfortunately, I'm much wiser now, thankfully, but unfortunately at the time, that led me to become a supporter of Barack Obama, unfortunately, back in 2008. I didn't think that all the things he was saying were going to turn out to be lies and false promises, but at least at the time they sounded very good, and it sounded like someone who wanted to promote peace and wanted to end these wars and wanted to close Guantanamo Bay. One of my wiser friends kind of called me out at the time and said, he's a liar, he's not going to change anything, you need to look deeper into these topics. And one of the topics she mentioned was actually 9/11. And she referred me to some websites that helped me to be exposed to some information that made me feel very confident in my understanding that we had been lied to, that the 9/11 official story, known as the 9/11 Commission Report, was filled with lies and inaccuracies and omitted testimonies. And I became very concerned that we had been lied to and that we were going to war with these countries based on lies, and that was very unsettling for me. So I naturally started searching more for the truth within 9/11, starting to support organizations like Alex Jones and Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and that felt like to be the right solution for me, was to support those organizations that appeared to be doing something about it. In one of the places I shared it with, I encountered this other PhD professor, a really smart person who was concerned and was listening to what I had to say, and then she even went further and shared some information with me and said, you know what, bombs don't explain what happened. They don't even come close to explaining what happened. And so you should check out all this other set of facts, Abe, that you have not seen before. And she referred me to Dr. Judy Wood's website, who's also a PhD professor and an engineer and a very well-qualified individual. What I found at her website was it just blew me away. And there was this collection of facts that were so well documented, so well referenced, with almost all of the sources provided, things that just could not be ignored and could not be dismissed, that showed conclusively that bombs do not explain what happened. In fact, the only thing that really explains what happens is the fact that those buildings were turned to fine dust in midair. And the only thing that really can do that is consistent with the evidence, is a general type of weapon known as a directed energy weapon. And it sounds very difficult to swallow when you hear that being said without first seeing the facts. And then I went back to these other truth groups to see if perhaps any of this information was on their websites, and it was not. None of these very important facts were on the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth site or on Alex Jones's website. I'm baffled as to why these people who claim to be searching for the truth, why they were not sharing all of these truthful, factual, very important pieces of evidence. And it just didn't seem right to me. So I actually ended up messaging Richard Gage, sent him an email, asking him if he knew about these facts on Dr. Judy Wood's website, and if he did know about them, why they're not on his website. Rather than getting a reply back from him, I actually got banned from their website. It turns out that my account and profile had been completely deleted All they had done was sent him a private email.
And there was no response, no message to you?
No, not at that time. So I was very concerned by that. It felt very unprofessional and very suspicious, especially considering that I was a donor and supporter of them for over a year. I was going to other truth forums, and I would ask other people if they had these experiences with the 9/11 truth, and I would tell them about what happened to me and tell them what information I had sent them that led to that action. And I was really turning people on to Dr. Judy Wood's website and the facts that are presented there. That is when I ended up getting contacted by not Richard Gage, but by this volunteer coordinator named Mark Graham. And he basically tried to soften my concerns and say that he was sorry, you know, that they did that, but they felt that because I had come across all this information, there was a potential that I could put that into my Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth profile, or I could use that information to contact other people's profiles and send it to them, and they didn't want that to be happening. What he said was, it's not within the scope of our mission. You know, when someone's just sharing facts, it's amazing that they would delete someone's account completely to prevent them from sharing facts. We took lots of screenshots of that and documented it, and he ultimately ended up offering to refund my donations, you know, to if I would stop telling people what happened, if I would be quiet. And I didn't accept that offer from them because I felt it was more important to tell people what happened and tell people the truth than to just get my little $80 back.
In the normal sort of regular thermite, it's actually iron oxide and aluminium powder. You mix those two together, obviously fairly freely available, and you put in a hot fuse. You need a hot fuse of several hundred degrees centigrade to set it off, so you can't just start it with a match. You need something like a magnesium strip. You know what the more common name for iron oxide is?
No.
Rust.
Rust. Oh, okay.
So going back to the World Trade Center, what did we have as part of the structure? Well, we had hundreds of steel girders. These steel girders have been standing in air for 30 years, approximately 30 years, perhaps slightly longer even. What do steel girders do when they've been standing in air for 30 years? They rust. And the shiny silvery exterior of the World Trade Center was, guess what, folks? It was an aluminium alloy. So for those guys like Stephen E. Jones and Richard Gage to say that thermite was found in the World Trade Center dust or unreacted thermite, well, what they're saying really, and what they're not saying to you, is that the remains of the building were found in the dust of the remains of the building. That's what they're saying. Or what made up the building was found in the remains of the building. So this talk of thermite is a cover story. Now, of course, they will argue, oh, but that's, you know, we know that this wasn't made up from the building because it's got this special signature and we found nanothermite. But they haven't got any evidence for that. They don't want people to know and understand and realise and become aware of that the buildings turn to dust before they hit the ground, because that is a new type of process. Two of the groups or two of the companies that Dr. Wood put into her list of defendants in the Keaton case in 2007 were, at least two, were military industrial contractors. And although, you know, you didn't say in your court case who did 9/11 because we didn't have the evidence and you didn't have the evidence to say that.
But I know who almost certainly knows. Exactly.
So we're kind of one step back from that. I very rarely hear anybody talking about these two companies, Science Applications International Corporation, which has now branched off into a company called Leidos as well, and Applied Research Associates. I think if you could just mention from, you know, what was in the court case about them, Dr. Wood, that would be quite useful, I think, for people that are not familiar.
Applied Research Associates, you know, they're manufacturers and developers of energy weapons. So they would recognize what technology was used. Not only that, they had a contract with the U.S. government, and I think they still do, to know everything about any weapon of mass destruction that is being developed or exists already anywhere. So they not only know what technology was used, but whose technology was used.
People think that the cover-up is just the fact that there were no Islamic terrorists, right? That's the cover-up that was given to the mainstream, right? But people such as the people in this audience who said, I don't believe that, right? They had to be managed. And what this has involved is creating bogus researchers, some of them scientists, and groups to steer those questioning the official narrative towards conventional explanations. So it was done by bombs, or it was done by nukes, or it was done by thermite. And they have been very successful at this. Intelligence agencies are well practiced in setting up fake companies, fake pressure groups, fake websites. They do it all the time. It's their bread and butter. One person who has exposed a lot of this is Andrew Johnson. He's been featured on my show a lot. He got involved quite a few years ago now with some of these groups that contain scientists that were trying to find the truth about 9/11, or he thought they were trying to find the truth about 9/11, because Andrew posted some physics equations on a website and he was asked to join one of these groups. Having read this, Andrew, you know, it just becomes apparent what a battle you've been involved in over the last 5 or 6 years. It really, you know, you are Judy Wood's pit bull terrier. That's the impression I get by reading this, and it's it must be, well, even slightly traumatic for you over the last. Just from reading your book, that you really, it really has been a battle of wills.
It's definitely been a battle, and I think I've described this as a numbers game. I mean, essentially, to summarise what's going on is perception management. I put down a little calculation about the free fall, which is very simple. You know, you use the laws of motion, S equals ut plus a half at squared, which is one of the equations of motion.
V squared equals u squared plus 2as as well.
That's one of the other equations of motion. That's right, that's it. And so, you know, you can derive from that the free fall time of the towers based on the acceleration due to gravity and so on. It's a very, very simple calculation when you know how to do it. And I'd been posting that around various forums, one of which was a physics forum, and that generated a couple of thousand responses, I think, over a period of about a year, 18 months or so. And I have a feeling that because I was trying to approach it from that angle, somebody was, you know, looking out for the people on the internet that were doing that. Right. And I got an email from Stephen E. Jones at the end of 2005, I believe it was December. I was invited to join the scholars group, and I thought, hooray, hooray, you know, there's some academics are actually trying to do something. Stephen E. Jones had been promoting that thermite was one of the main causes of the destruction of the buildings. And Dr. Wood had had various debates in email, and sort of said, well, why are you saying this with thermite when we don't really have enough evidence at this point to say that, yet you're claiming that that's what was used. And then Jones published this paper, which you know, Dr. Judy Wood certainly didn't endorse, and he published that at the end of 2005, and I was one of the reviewers on that. And I mean, with my limited knowledge at that time, I couldn't see anything wrong with it, and now I look back and you know, I think how silly I was. They were actually set up to round up people like me and lead them down a false alleyway. And they didn't really count on what Dr. Wood was doing, who was basically doing her own thing. And, you know, you can tell the story better than I, Dr. Wood, but they tried to involve you in various activities which didn't involve using your skills, you know, your most highly tuned skills for doing forensic studies, did they?
It kept me busy trying to upload a website and make changes to it every hour or half hour around the clock. Like that was urgent, just busy work stuff.
But then when you broke away from all of that, that's when you actually started
causing some trouble.
Yeah. So I saw that certain people were acting to try and keep that research marginalised, and that's what I wanted to document. Okay. Stephen E. Jones, I found out that he was connected to the cold fusion research in 1989, and that was a very interesting connection because that had a direct connection into the energy issues.
Stephen E. Jones, a physics professor at nearby Brigham Young University, learned of Pons and Fleischmann's work through an informant at the DOE. In a flagrant example of shameless opportunism, Jones insisted on going public quickly with his comparatively much less clear results. Disparaging the excess heat claims of Fleischmann and Pons, Jones' announcement would have effectively prevented the two scientists from patenting their process, a process they had developed on their own over long years of research.
In this year 2000 documentary called Heavy Watergate, you can see Stephen E. Jones in this documentary mentioned and referenced, and he's mentioned in Eugene Malov's book. Dr. Eugene Malov was a researcher who resigned from Massachusetts Institute of Technology over the cold fusion affair.
Because he knew and could prove that cold fusion worked.
Yes, essentially.
It produced energy from the quantum vacuum or wherever.
Wherever. It's a nuclear. The other thing is it's some type of nuclear reaction, and this is what the Hutchinson effect also seems to create. It's some type of nuclear effect which comes into play both in cold fusion and in the Hutchinson effect. If you look at the way that materials can be transmuted, for example, that's a common element in this.
Now, Eugene Malov was murdered in 2004.
He was, which coincidentally was just over a year before Stephen E. Jones came onto the scene. And Eugene Malov's book mentions Stephen E. Jones on 100 pages. So he knew, he was very familiar with Stephen E. Jones.
Michael Zabur, who had access to Malov's work.
Essentially, he probably would have, because it turns out that Michael Zabur had an uncle called William Zabur, who ended up working with Eugene Malov on this New Energy Foundation, a project they started to try and find research funds for people, for example, like John Hutchison, to continue looking at this new energy technology, this free energy technology. Michael Zabur wanted to tell Dr. Wood that he knew about energy.
And Michael Zabur was murdered in 2006.
He was.
I'll just read out a little section here, Andrew. This is in connection with news director Helen Borden.
Oh, yes.
Where you say, regardless, as campaigners, we will continue to reveal the truth about 9/11 to the British public, and I now personally regard the media as a controlled entity and one that is ducking its responsibility. It is therefore my responsibility to spend my own time and money to promulgate the truth about 9/11 being an inside job, and I will, unless this programme changes things, continue to discuss my email exchanges with BBC News director Helen Borden, who has blatantly ignored evidence and refused opportunities for us to present our evidence in some broadcast vehicle or other. This is now documented and will, if possible, be used to prosecute the BBC for a breach of its charter. So all of this correspondence you've had with the BBC, Andrew, where you've brought it to their attention about the work of Dr. Judy Wood and what really happened on 9/11. They're going to be in court one day, hopefully. Real problem people don't get their face on mainstream TV. And I'm going to use the example of Osama bin Laden just to explain what I mean by this statement, because I think a lot of people in this room probably know that Osama bin Laden had nothing at all to do with 9/11. There's not a single shred of evidence linking Osama bin Laden to 9/11. But there is evidence that Osama bin Laden had connections to the CIA before 9/11. So the clip I'm going to show you is of Bill Cooper speaking 3 months before 9/11 on his radio show, and he's talking about Osama bin Laden and about how Osama bin Laden was recruited by the CIA. Remember, this clip is 3 months before 9/11.
Can you believe what you have been seeing on CNN today, ladies and gentlemen? Can you believe it? Supposedly, a CNN reporter found Osama bin Laden, took a television camera crew with him, went into Osama bin Laden's hideout, interviewed him and his top leadership, his top lieutenants and colonels and generals in their hideout. Now, don't you think that's kind of strange, folks? You see, because the largest intelligence apparatus in the world, with the biggest budget in the history of the world, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years, and can't find him. The FBI also, under the leadership of Louis Freeh, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years and years and years and many years, and can't find him. Some doofus, jerk-off reporter with a camera crew waltzes right into his hideout and interviews him. Now, that tells us two things. Either everyone in the intelligence community and all of the intelligence agencies of the United States government are blithering idiots and incompetent fools, including the entire apparatus of the FBI and all of their personnel, or they're lying to us. They're not looking for him at all. And the second is the truth. You see, the CIA created Osama bin Laden. They recruited him. They trained him. They found his leadership. They brought them all together. They showed them how to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and when that was over, they still continued to fund him and train him, and they're now using him to help bring about world government by making him the big boogeyman, because they can't use Saddam Hussein anymore. If I were the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, within 2 weeks I would have him dead or in custody without fail. Without fail. A reporter from CNN and his little camera crew got in to Osama bin Laden's secret hideout and conducted an interview. If you don't believe me, tune into CNN. They're probably running it right now as I'm speaking. And if you believe it, you are one of the stupidest jerks that ever lived on the face of this earth. And whatever is going to happen that they're going to blame on Osama bin Laden, don't you even believe it.
Whatever's going to happen that they're going to blame on Osama bin Laden, don't you even believe it. That's 3 months before 9/11. 2 months after 9/11, the guy speaking there was dead. He was shot outside his house. Now, so my statement, real problem people don't get their face on mainstream TV. Osama bin Laden was not a real problem person. He was a creation of the CIA. They wanted him on mainstream TV. Now, you can use the same litmus test for whistleblowers, because people who give away government secrets and speak out are supposedly problem people. And if they're wanted by the government, they're not going to get their faces on TV, because the CIA or whoever wants them is going to capture them and put them in prison before they get on TV. And I would apply that litmus test to these two guys, Ed Snowden and Julian Assange. They've had masses of coverage on mainstream TV. They're not whistleblowers. They want these guys' disclosures to be known about. Now, here is a whistleblower who has not been on mainstream TV, Dr. Judy Wood, and her book, Where Did the Towers Go?, I would suggest is the most important book yet written this century, because it explains in scientific terms what happened on 9/11, and she has not been allowed on mainstream TV.
There's three main things that keep people from seeing what's going on: problem-solving skills, groupthink, peer pressure, and that they're terrified by the implications.
Partly where this comes down to having your own inner knowledge and understanding of things, actually being able to look at a situation, analyse it, come to a conclusion and know that it's correct, and then you can pass on that knowledge to other people if they want to have it. But other people just don't know the difference between knowledge and opinion, and they'll just say, oh, it's just an idea, it's just an opinion. And that's become more apparent more recently. People's perception is managed without them realising it, and they don't realise the degree to which it is managed, and it's managed to a degree that it makes them think in certain ways, such that when they are presented with certain information, they have one of perhaps 3 or 4 different reactions, and they don't actually ever discover the implications of what you're trying to show them. because they think that all these highly paid, or maybe not always highly paid journalists, would have investigated it and found this out.
They hear pile, collapse, terrorism, or Muslims or whatever, and they just keep saying those words over and over again, and people start repeating them as though those are absolute facts.
Yeah, as far as the media manipulation goes, I fell victim to that absolutely for quite some time.
One of the things that is very common when you're trying to say, you start off the conversation, and I've had several conversations like this, where you say, well, actually, I'm talking about 9/11, and I'm talking about, you're talking about conspiracy theories? No, I'm not talking about conspiracy theories. I'm talking about the towers turning to dust. They'll say, so why would they do that then? Why would they turn these towers to dust? Why isn't the official story true? And they immediately start looking for motives, and they don't look at the actual information in front of them.
The judgment's clouded, really. It's clouded by their conditioning from the mainstream media, and of course all the people that are around them that have got the same mainstream media information. That they seem to keep and herd them back in line. So if anybody steps out of that and says, "Whoa, just hang on a second," they'll say, "Oh, no, you don't."
You're divisive. You're just trying to be divisive.
Yeah, exactly.
It's what Brian Cox doesn't talk about that makes him subversive. Yeah? Why doesn't Brian Cox talk about the most important book written this century, Where Did the Towers Go, by former Professor of Engineering Mechanics, Dr. Judy Wood, which proves that the World Trade Center towers didn't even hit the ground. They were turned to dust in midair, which could not have been caused by aeroplanes.
Let's pick up with a few of the themes we were just listening to there. Let's speak to Dr. Afshin Shahi, who's a security and terror expert from the University of Bradford. He's here in the studio with me, and as we were listening to that, you were saying to me the nature of terrorism over the last couple of years has changed, and we need to change our approach. Just tell me more.
Yes, absolutely. When you think about it, over the last 10 or 15 years, the nature of terrorism has been evolving and changing. Remember what happened 9/11. Of course, 9/11 was a paradigm shift in every sense of the term. Part of the reason that it was a paradigm shift was because of the fact that Al-Qaeda managed to use a civilian airplane as a missile to create maximum destruction.
I believe 9/11 was an attack on human consciousness. My colleagues quit thinking that day. They were told that they saw a collapse. Okay, we saw a collapse. It's not that they're evil, stupid, or anything. It's that something took control of human thinking in a weird way. And if you stop and think more about it, almost the entire planet saw what happened that day right in front of them. And only a few really, truly saw it, what was really happening. That, to me, is a shock. I never would have imagined that.